I'm not a PGA Tour player. I'm not a full-time YouTuber. At least not yet. My name is AJ Porter, and I'm a 28-year-old marketing professional trying to make the jump to compete, grow a brand, and see just how far I can take this game. And I'm documenting every part of that journey. The training, the tournaments, the setbacks, everything that goes on behind the scenes. Are you joining the journey? Then we've had in the past, obviously we've had you and Dawson both on, but we're going to talk all things caddying and all of your extensive golf experience in this episode. So welcome back.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely. So last time we had spoken, you all had just gotten back from, I believe, Puerto Rico and your PGA Tour event. So I kind of wanted to just start off there. I mean, walk me through. I know in that particular event, if I remember correctly, there were some logistical issues where he couldn't get enough prep time in. Is that correct, based on how he had Monday qualified in and then getting flights and sort of all that stuff? Is that accurate?
Yeah, it makes it a little tougher. I mean, we didn't arrive until Tuesday afternoon, and being his first PGA Tour event, there's maybe you're a little bit behind some of the other players, but that's all part of it. So hopefully next time we're there, we'll have a little bit better idea of what we have in front of us.
Yep. So talk me through on kind of a standard week. Let's say you did have enough time, and you know that you're going to a Korn Ferry event. You know that you're going to a state open or something like that. The event starts on Wednesday. You're arriving on a Monday. I mean, what does that look like for you as a caddy in terms of what you have to get prepped? How much are you scouting beforehand, and what does that look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to see the course twice. I mean, obviously for the player, he wants to get some shots in and, maybe work on a couple things he's working on for the week. But for me as a caddy, I want to spend at least one round where I'm maybe not as focused on, what the player's doing shot-wise and carries and that type of stuff, and maybe have a little bit more time for myself looking at possible pin placements, kind of scouting, places to miss, and, just getting a general feel for the course, where I'm not as burdened with, the actual play from a, player caddy standpoint, just me kind of, making my own notes and getting comfortable with the feel out there, and, maybe wind direction as far as prevailing wind and that type of stuff.
Yeah. So are you a big compass guy in terms of wind, or are you pretty good at kind of telling where it's at, or do you use any apps or anything like that?
I don't use anything other than just feel. I mean, I tend to be a feel player in my own game, and that's what, Dawson, who I caddy for, he fits into that same profile. So I think, we tend to like to feel it. I mean, anytime I can, use little things, if there's, maybe a flagpole in the distance to just kind of, guarantee a direction. I mean, obviously you might jot some things down in the yardage book ahead of the round, what the wind direction should be for the day. But then as you get out there hole to hole, things can just change a little bit feel-wise. So, I think you got to go with your gut no matter what when you're approaching each shot.
Yeah, so how much, are you a big notes guy, like in terms of, you're scouting out a course for the first time and you're like, okay, look, we don't want to miss it left, or, the good leave is here and yada, yada, yada. I mean, are you doing a lot of that stuff beforehand, or just kind of trying to generally remember it? What does that look like for you?
It definitely jot some stuff down in the yardage book, because, when you're in the moment, it can be, a little harder to just think of things on the fly, especially if, things have gone a certain way in the round, whether things are going really well or things are, starting to head in the wrong direction. It's good to be able to refer to your yardage book. And, same thing as a player, when you have those notes, I feel like that's such a comforting thing to be able to look back and kind of get yourself back on track. So that's where I am with that. As far as around the greens, I like to walk off a lot of the slopes on the greens and get really comfortable with, let's say it pins front right, and maybe there's a large slope about 12 paces behind the pin. So I'm walking off all those slopes just to give my player, those extra that extra information as far as numbers. I mean, the big thing with caddying, I feel like that the average player doesn't take advantage of, that we try to take advantage of, or at least I try to take advantage of in tournaments, is using all the numbers to your advantage. And what I mean by that is front edge number, back edge number, how many paces off the sides of the green. So, the one thing I notice when I'm caddying, because, I caddy at a club down here called The Park in West Palm Beach, and when I'm in New Jersey, I caddy at a club called Eagle Oaks. That's where I learned how to caddy. So when I'm not caddying for Dawson, I'm just caddying for, average players in those spots. And the one thing I notice is guys get in the habit where you'll give them a number and they'll say, oh, I don't like that number, or they're not happy with it. Whereas I feel like the best players and the best caddies can make any number work to their benefit. And I think it's important to know those back edge numbers and front edge numbers to kind of dial it in, where you can make somebody confident in anything. So let's say, it's 157 to the pin, and the player feels maybe they're not super confident in that 157 number because it puts them in between. Well, then if I, say something like, yeah, but we got 164 to the back, and they know that they can't hit their 8-iron more than 164. Now it's gone from, oh, well, I felt like I was in between, to, oh, wait a minute, this is actually a good number for me. So it's really about conveying the information to get to get your player confident in the shot, because confidence before the shot is what's going to lead to good shots, in my opinion, obviously.
I think that's a really interesting frame, and definitely something that I don't feel like I do enough of. Like I've really been working this winter on off speed shots and ones that are sort of in between the number and being able to take numbers off. And I find that I can get obsessed with pin high, even like when it's to a front pin or a back pin or different things. Like I can't tell you how many times, and this is stupid course management on my own sake, but like, let's say, for example, 128 is the number and the pin is 3 from the back. Like, I could try and stretch a gap wedge and it would never go 132. But like, instead I'm choosing pitching wedge, where if you just trying to chip it back there, you pure it a couple yards, like miss by like 3 yards, and then you're over the back and you might make bogey now. So I think that's like a perfect example of what you're talking about, where players are using that to their advantage as opposed to trying to hit the perfect shot every time.
No, for sure. And I think that's the other thing, is when people are watching tour events, sometimes they don't understand, a player will just say, oh, I just wasn't getting good numbers all day. And even for a really good player that's using, the thought process that I was just saying, sometimes you're just not getting great numbers. So, it's not that that's going to dictate to you shooting a poor round, but maybe it's a little harder for you to hit it inside 10 feet because, you're kind of erring on the safer side, being that like, it wasn't a perfect number for me, so I'm going to be a little safer, and it's leading to a lot of 20, 25 footers. So,
yeah. So the team over at Game Forge had an interesting stat for PGA Tour and Korn Ferry Tour players, that they were looking for their players in tournaments to hit it inside 20 feet like 7 times a round. Do you look at any sort of numbers like that, or is that not really relevant? Or they call those in positions, so basically, effectively scoring opportunities. Do you guys ever look at any sort of stats like that?
Yeah, I mean, I keep Dawson's stats for proximity to the hole, and then I'll break it down by, what club he hits, and then try to get a little bit of a barometer on, what his proximity to the hole is based on club, and then find, maybe where we need to improve. Yeah, I think that's certainly a good thing to do. You figure from 20 feet and in, most good putters feel like they've got a good chance to convert those. I mean, the tour make percentage may not show that exactly, but obviously you're trying to get it inside, 10 feet as much as you can. But I think realistically, like when I tell the average person, they'll hit a shot with a 7-iron and they hit it to 30 feet, and they kind of look at me like, oh man, that wasn't a great shot. And I'm like, look, you're like not that far off the tour average there, and considering you're not on tour, I'm talking about the average amateur player. I think that it's just a misconception for how, what the actual proximity to the hole is, even for the best in the world. So,
Yeah. So, just sitting on this topic just for one more minute, I know you said you're a real feel sort of player. Do you do any sort of decade system or anything of the sorts, or is it kind of, you've played so long, you've been around the game so long that you're able to kind of pick good targets based on the shot shapes that, that your players hit?
yeah, I like to think I do it that way by feel. I mean, no human is perfect, but I try to give my player the best opportunity to play their best round, and sometimes it's by maybe staying a little quiet in certain situations. So I mean, I think that's the other important thing is learning when to speak up, and the way I've always thought of it is I try to be, if anything, a little more on the reserved or quieter side, and that way when I do have a strong opinion, it means something a little bit more. I think when you're giving opinions constantly all the time, they can get drowned out by, like, he's always saying something. But, I think when you let your play, certainly when you're talking about tour players, when you let them do their thing, I think then when you do step in and you might say, look, I really don't like that club. I think it's too much here. I think we need to think about this and that. Then maybe they're going to respect your opinion a little bit more and maybe take heed of that. And I think that can work to your benefit. So,
yeah. How long did that take you to figure out? I feel like that is such a fine line when you're caddying. Like I caddied for Brian Sullivan on one of the days here at the Metro Open, the final day, and it was like it was interesting because I was just biting my tongue for so much of the round because as a player, like when you know how it feels as a player to be in the situation when you don't want someone to say something to you, even though I'm sitting there as a caddy going, I don't think this is the right shot, but I would rather him be fully committed to the wrong shot than partially committed to the right shot. So I feel like that's a really difficult thing to deal with as a caddy. I don't know if you've experienced that at all, but
no, for sure. I mean, you got to know when to push and when to just stay quiet. I think on the with reading putts, I mean, that could be a little different. I mean, depending on how much time you've spent with a player, you get a feel for what they like and what they don't like, and some players are certainly low maintenance and some require a lot different. But as far as putting, I mean, I feel like I'm one of the best screen readers in the world, certainly, but that doesn't mean that my opinion is always going to make my player hit a better putt, if you understand what I'm saying. Because, I can give the perfect read, but if they're not buying into it and trusting it and it just doesn't match what they're seeing, then sometimes they're not going to make a confident stroke. So it's definitely a fine line, and it's all part of the process of, like I said, certainly every individual player is going to be different. So that's important, but also just learning, different spots in the game. I mean, I've caddied so many times now, so many rounds for different players. And I'm talking about more on the amateur level than I've really only caddied for Dawson for the most part professionally. But you almost can get to the point where you can predict the future. I can see shots happening. I know what's going to happen. I can see the mistakes coming, and you got to try to use that to your advantage too. You got to know when to step in, because I've learned more about golf, I think, caddying than I have playing, because you have such a different perspective where you're kind of, taking yourself out of the situation and looking at it from through a different lens. And I think you can, it just changes your perspective so much. So I think you got to use that when you can.
Yeah, it's interesting because it kind of removes the ego from it, doesn't it? Whenever it's not your own shot, it kind of just goes out the window, and you can objectively see. Like I caddy at Belle Reve here in town, and within like probably 2 holes, I can tell how far guys actually hit the ball, and it's oftentimes just relating to the average amateur golfer here. It's oftentimes not how far they think they hit the ball. Like, they're like, yeah, my 7-iron goes about 160. It's like, nah, your 7-iron goes about 140. And so, like, when you try and club them later on in the round, I don't know if you've experienced this or not, but, like, you kind of try and build that rapport with them, and you're like, man, trust me, this is the right club. And then they're the first time they're kind of like, nah, that's the wrong club. They come up short. Then the next time they're like, all right, I'll give it a go. And then it's, pin high. It's kind of like, I told you, like, you should listen to me.
Yeah, I mean, that's so common. I mean, you hit the nail on the head there. I think the great parallel, whether it's a good player or just the average player, is just building the trust, right? So, you got to get that common ground where they trust what you're saying and you guys are kind of speaking the same language. With numbers, I mean, certainly with tour players, I know that Stevie Williams talked about doing this with Tiger when he was like juiced up. I would never really do this for the most part with Dawson or another tour player, but certainly with the average player, I mean, I'll add yardage to a shot just because I know that, for the most part, a guy 10 handicap or more has to prove to you that they can hit it over the green, before they, guys come up short so often, and it's a little different, totally different with a tour player because, you're talking about carry numbers. So when we talked about before with front edge of the green, well, a tour player is going to use the front edge of the green or the front bunker lip to the carry of the green so much more often than I could use with a 10 or 15 handicap because, the tour players are dialed in where their carry number is going to be within 1, 2, 3 yards almost all the time. Whereas, from the average guy, it's basically a guess, which, I try to say it in the nicest way, but it's.
No, it 100% is. I always kind of laugh at that. And yeah, you hit the nail on the head again with the building that rapport. They kind of do the same thing with green reading. Like, I caddied at a club here in town, Old Warson, and the greens are like insane. But, kind of the first couple holes you get someone out there and I'm like, hey, the line's up here. And they're like, there's no way it's there. And then they miss by like 5 feet low. And I'm like, dude, you going to listen to me? Or
yeah,
like,
right, exactly.
I promise you.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good way to get it going, though, because then they're like, okay, maybe this guy does know what he's talking about. And, I'm going to play a lot better if I do listen. One of the tough things with putting for me is when I putt, I don't like to think about speed if I can help it. I mean, I think that's the way that you can make the most putts is if you're unconscious with the speed. So when I read putts for guys, unless it's a severe thought where it's like severely uphill or it's going to be way faster than most players think, I try not to give them speed thoughts, but they are so crucial to lines because, I'll give a line and then they'll ask me, yeah, but it depends on the speed. Well, yeah, I mean, every putt depends on speed, but I'm reading it for proper speed, which is, like 18 inches past, most of the time. So, I think there's always that fine line too, where the average player their speed's inconsistent. So then that's why they don't make that many putts because the best players that are making a lot of putts, their speed's consistent. It's always, either die in or 2 feet past the hole, right in that gap, and that's what makes the hole bigger. So,
yeah, no, I totally agree with that. That's actually it's funny you bring that up. So the episode that will have came out before this was with Gareth from Aim Point, and when I was over in England working with them, that was like all we worked on was my speed control because they were like, yeah, your start line's like, basically elite, like tour level start line, but you suck at controlling your speed. Like it's not even it's not even close. Like they're like, you start it as good as just about anybody in the world, but you cannot control your speed, so you're not gonna make as many putts as you should. So I was just kind of like, that's interesting. Like,
Yeah, and I think it's one of the tougher things to work on. Dawson and I talk about it all the time. Speed drills. They're really, and maybe you have some insight on this, but there's not as many speed drills out there as there are drills for your stroke and drills for the fundamentals and things like that. So
yeah, no, there's really not. I have like the decade speed bucket one that I do that he has out there on YouTube, and then I have one that I should probably post it on YouTube, but it's an Aim Point one that they taught me over there, and where you're kind of starting at 10 feet and putting into like a speed bucket basically and kind of moving back, but like there's not there's not as many things around it. You know, it's just kind of developing that feel and having, you know, sort of the good tempo to your stroke and kind of all those different pieces. So I want to pivot real quick into one of the, oh, you know, I don't want to say dark sides of caddying, but like, what do you do when it's all going bad? You know, how do you navigate that? How do you not let your, like, and this is with high level players, you know, how do you not let your emotions go a negative way, their emotions go a negative way? You know, what does that look like for you, kind of corralling all of that in?
I mean, again, I think it's very individualized, you know, depending on the player. Dawson's fairly even keeled. I'll certainly step in and say things at certain times, you know, try to give him reminders. You know, I think that with certain players, you can be forceful at times, and it can work really well. With others, I think it can make them vacillate and go in the wrong direction. So, you know, you walk a fine line with that. You know, you don't want to. You almost want to commiserate with them a little bit, but also let them know, like, come on, we've got a job to do. Like, that's behind us. You know, got to go forward. And again, I'll go back to the yardage book. That's why notes are so important in the yardage book, because, you know, let's say you make that double bogey or even a bad bogey when you were looking at a birdie. If the player, or even as a caddy, if you can go back to your yardage book for that next tee shot or on the next hole, you know, maybe it helps you kind of refocus and get back in your rhythm, because, you know, the biggest thing that happens is it throws you out of rhythm. I mean, you know, your timing, you know, whether it's pre-shot routine or even the cadence as a caddy to the player, like, there's a rhythm to that, to you delivering the yardages, you delivering the info, you know, telling them, you know, right before they step into the shot, whether it's like, come on, you know, you got the right club here, good swing here, you know, you can be aggressive with this one, whatever the little things are that are keys, you know, to get them in that right mindset. That's, you know, can be huge in the round. And I think it's underplayed probably by the average person, but, you know, it can be so vital and crucial in tournament play.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. Have you, how much do you work? Like, do you have to do any sort of mental work? I know all the players, obviously, you know, we have to do mental work to kind of be able to stay focused. I mean, do you do anything with the cadence, or like, are you actively thinking about it? I don't, but I don't know if you kind of are actively thinking about it, where it's like, hey, let's be, you know, to yourself, you're kind of thinking, hey, let's be intentional with the cadence, and let's slow things down here, or hey, we need to speed it up to get that momentum going, or, you know, how much are you trying to control that pace?
You know, you don't want to force it. You like to let everything be natural. Again, like I said, I go back to the feel thing. You know, every round's going to be a little different. So sometimes you might be dictating the pace, and you know, you got to know in your player. You know, some players speed up and they start walking faster when they're angry. Some players slow down and, you know, get a little bit more of in a shell, and they're like, you know, a little upset with themselves. So you've got to recognize that, and then maybe just, you know, get them to modify it back to what their norm is. So, you know, again, It helps so much knowing the player in that situation. Whereas, you know, if you're with a guy that you haven't been with that much, I think you're just trying to do your work as best as you can, and, you know, give the information in a timely fashion and be accurate.
Yeah, no, I think that's really a fair point. How difficult was it for you with no rangefinders? I don't think I've never played with no rangefinders on the tour event.
Oh,
they
like
don't have
slightly difficult, only in the fact that it might take you a little longer to get your numbers, so you don't have quite as much. It's taking a little time away from you figuring out in your mind how far you think it's going to play or something like that. The one point I would make, going back to what we talked about in the beginning, is I feel like for the average player, the rangefinders can actually be a detriment. It can be a bad thing because, you know, we've gotten in the mindset of you walk up to your ball, I shoot the yardage, 148, right away. Okay, 148. That's a 9-iron. Rather than, when you step off of yardage, you look at your pin sheet, you're going to say 148. Oh, wait a minute. It's 148, but the front of the greens is 143. So really, I want to play this a couple yards longer than 148 because, I don't have much room short. So I think the rangefinder it takes away some of the element of using all the info that you would use if you just walk it off, or you're paying attention to the yardage book, the pin sheet, and all that info. So
no, I think that's a really interesting point, because I've been trying to, sounds dumb, but I've been trying to pinpoint why and obviously flat lies all make sense, but like why I'm such a better player on TrackMan than I am outdoors. Like it's like night and day. Like obviously you're on a flat mat, no elements, anything like that, but like it's a pretty stark difference. But like whenever I'm looking on TrackMan, I'm paying attention to, hey, it's 140 to the front here, and like, yeah, that club isn't really going to get it. Like, let's just dump it behind it and move on. This isn't a perfect number. Like, let's do that. Whereas outside, I'm like, nope, I need to hit it perfectly pin high, and so that's that's interesting.
Yeah, I also wonder, the other thing would be like maybe indoors, because I always talk about people, playing golf swing rather than playing golf. So maybe when you're hitting into it on a TrackMan, or even if you're hitting on the range, it's easy for somebody to be like in their swing bubble, whereas when you get on the course, you got to break that bubble down and use the swing mechanics that you have locked in, but really just play golf. You know what I mean? That's where feel and shot shaping and your eye really has to take over. So I think it's a balance of all that.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good feedback. I mean, I think the listeners have a good amount to take away from this. I mean, definitely the biggest thing that I'll be taking away, putting into my game, is utilizing all the numbers to be able to, to create a fuller picture. Are there any other things that you can think of that, maybe cause slop in the round? Like, I always call it slop, or just kind of trash bogeys or different things. Anything that kind of comes to mind that are maybe either round killers or slop?
I just think maybe not being focused on, the task at hand and getting out of your game plan and your comfort zone. I mean, again, I'll go back to the yardage books. That's why it's important to have somewhat of a game plan. Obviously in golf, it's going to change day by day a little bit just because of conditions. But yeah. I think it's easy to make a bogey or two early in the round, and now all of a sudden I start flag hunting when I might not have been flag hunting otherwise. And so, you got to give yourself the opportunity to play to your strengths and give yourself a chance to come back from some mistakes early in the round, but not over, pressurizing yourself shot-wise. So, you got to stay in your comfort zone, and certainly in 4-round events, it's more important than anything else, because certainly one shot or one hole isn't gonna ruin your tournament unless you let it. So I think really most of my takeaways would be, from a mental standpoint, is kind of just watching the player and making sure that they're sticking with the proper mindset and not letting outside factors, whether it's somebody in the group bothering them or something that happened, a bad break, which you really don't have control of, letting that dictate the rest of your round. So I think that's where I can see a lot of errors happening. Yeah,
no, I think that's a fair point. As we're kind of wrapping up here, I want to be very conscious of your time, but I also wanted to just give you the opportunity to give any shout outs or any sponsors, partners, anything like that.
Yeah, well, certainly, Dawson Jones, he's my man. So hopefully we get to the PGA Tour soon. Trying to get to Korn Ferry, and we have a lot of people behind us, especially back in New Jersey and down here in Florida. Everybody at Eagle Oaks Golf and Country Club, they've basically been there since day one, and without their support, I really don't think we would have the opportunity to do what we've done. And then everybody down in Florida, we have a lot of friends down here as well, and we've been so lucky to have the support. And, like I said, I learned how to caddy at Eagle Oaks. So I think, whether it be with the better players there or even just the average guys, I think that's where I kind of made my basis of understanding the game from that side. And I've continued now to work at the park in West Palm, which is a great course as well. And, I get to caddy for different guys every day on a daily basis. And so, it just gives me such a great perspective on the game. And, golf's taken me all around the world throughout my life. And so I'm so lucky to have it as a big part of my life.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, man. Well, awesome. Appreciate you taking the time. And as always, pleasure having you on.
Thanks, AJ. Best of luck to you.
Cool. Thanks, brother.